Welcome to Henley.
My dear old thing, goodness, when I sat in that chair, I thought I was never going to stop.
Well, I wondered how long it was going to be before you said "my dear old thing," and it was two seconds.
It's become a knee-jerk operation with me. You'll want to know quickly how it began, because people always want to know that. In 1976, 5 of us drove in a 1921 Rolls-Royce from London to Bombay. And when we got to Mashhad, in the holy city in East Iran, we found a hotel manager who was a German who discovered a cachet of champagne, which was unlikely within about 300 yards of the most holy mosque in the world, but nonetheless it was there. And so we thought the best thing to do was to drink it. And the next day we had hangovers. The old Rolls only went at 50 miles an hour, and so left at 6:30 in the morning. The Rover, the backup car, driven by Michael and with Judy, and they left 2 hours later, and they overtook us and waved us in, and went on ahead, booked somewhere for lunch and waved us in. And when I was getting up that morning and came down to reception, I had to write Michael Bennett, the driver of the Rover, a message. And I wrote "my dear," and I couldn't think of his name, and so I wrote "old thing." And when we got to lunch, he said, "I haven't been called my dear old thing since my father died." And that's how it started, and it stuck.
How fortuitous for us all.
Sorry, much ado about nothing. Go on.
No, because that you detail the escapade, if I can call it that, of driving to India. This was to cover a cricket tour. It wasn't just let's go to India. And the main genius behind this was John Woodcock.
Well, Wooders and I invented the tour, so to speak. We were in Perth. We'd been there in 74-5 in Australia when Thompson and Lilly came together for the first time and destroyed us. And the next year, the West Indies went there, and we went back, Johnny for the Times and me for I don't know how many, a number of different papers. And we were watching an extraordinary test match in Perth when Roy Fredericks hooked Dennis Lilly's first ball of the match for 6. And on the one evening, we were dining together, and I said, with any luck, we'll be in India this time next year. And Johnny said, the last time we went to India, he said, I tried to, I wanted to go by car. He said, Michael Melford, who you probably knew on the Sunday Telegraph, Michael Melford, Brian Johnston and I decided to drive. And I said, why didn't you? And he said, because the wives didn't think it a good idea. And I said to him, you and I don't have any such encumbrances at the moment. And so we decided to do it. And we made our first team selection that night. A lady called Judy Casey, who lived in Sydney, was a great friend of both of ours, who was a laugh a minute and was wonderful. And then we picked up Adrian Little, the Rolls, and Michael Bennett, who brought the Rover, and there were 5 of us. It took us 46 days and nights.
You make it sound very easy, actually.
Well, we had no problems at all, except, actually, the people, or let's put it another way, the cars were easily the least temperamental members of the party. We had two significant, they were quite boring blowouts in the Rolls, and we had half a dozen new tires for the Rolls flown into Tehran, as one does. But that was the only thing that went wrong. And no one shot at us or anything like that, which would have been rather exciting.
I don't think anybody's going to try that journey for the next tour out there at the current state of affairs.
No, I don't. I think it's unlikely. If you got it, you'd be unlikely to get as far as the Bosphorus, I think, probably.
I'm going to take you back because your book is called, absolutely probably, Sharing My Love of Cricket, with a subtitle, Playing the Game and Spreading the Word, which you've done to huge effect through your career, through your life. And actually, Henry had a birthday last week?
Oh, Lord, yes, I did. And Monday of last week, I went as far away as I could, which was Malta, which shows you my imagination these days is a bit limited, but there we are.
But one of the people who figured very early on in your love of cricket was the wonderful Miss Potts.
Miss Peterson.
Miss Peterson?
Miss Peterson. I was at a prep school called Sunnydale, which is not far away from here. And I was taught cricket at the age of 7.5 when I went away to boarding school, which was cruel, I think, even by the standards of those days. But actually, I loved it. And Miss Peterson was a fairly bouncy lady. She was well built. She had teeth. She had teeth that were designed to enable her to eat corn on the cob through a Venetian blind. She took no prisoners and bowled underarm off about 7 paces. And actually inspired in me a love of cricket, so much so that the following year, in 1948, on June the 27th, I went to Lord's to watch the third day of the Ashes Test, England-Australia, when I became one of the ever-diminishing number of people to have seen the great Don Bradman bat. He made 89, and I can see him being caught by Bill Edridge at first slip, up there. Bedser, off Alec Bedser, was bowling from the pavilion end. Extraordinary.
Your memory's undiminished, isn't it?
Well, is it my memory is undiminished, or is it rather like this? When you hit your knee here, your leg kicks out. You know, I've been living with that one for a long time.
The extraordinary. Your book recounts encounters with wonderful cricketers. I mean, you mentioned Bill Edridge. You met him later on, playing for Norfolk.
Bill started with Norfolk in the 30s, before going to Middlesex. And then when he'd finished with Middlesex in 58, he came back and captained us again. I was I suppose his sort of vice captain for about 10 or 11 years. And he was wonderful. He stood at first slip, caught most things. He never stopped talking. And I kept next door to him. So we had tremendous fun. And we were sort of known as the North Thames Gas Board, because we prattled on a bit.
But after the wonderful education at Sunningdale, you went to Eton, played for the first 11, captained the first 11?
I think I played 3 years. Well, I captained it, except I didn't really, because in 1957 I rather stupidly bicycled under a bus and spent about 4 weeks unconscious, which just doesn't do you any good. And I was very lucky to live, actually, terribly lucky to live. But in fact, I suppose if it hadn't happened, and I tried to make a career in cricket, which I think I would have tried to do, because I was passionate about the game, if I succeeded, I'd had to retire at the age of 35 or 6 or 7, wouldn't I? Instead of which, I gave up the microphone on the fortnight before my 78th birthday. So thank you, Buzz, very much.
But you went from Eton to Cambridge.
Yes, that was probably a mistake, because I went up very soon after the accident. I had the accident early in June, and I went up the following October, or end of September, which was too soon. And although I managed to struggle into a bad Cambridge side in 59, I was a very different cricketer, and got kicked out of Cambridge for committing a number of sins, including failing my exams. And my examiners won by innings each time, which was sad. Then I spent 1.5 years in the City of London. No, 2.5 years in the City of London.
Yes, you recall that with huge affection. I think it's 2 lines in your book.
Awful. Well, I delved into it in another book, in rather more extreme terms.
But there is a scorebook somewhere that has a wonderful thing of Cowdrey, caught Blofeld, bowled Dexter.
Oh yes, that was I think it was my first class wicket I so to speak had a hand in. It was at Fenner's in 1958, and I made naught in my first class innings, which is a very sad moment, and caught a bouncer and caught it short leg. Oh dear. And I remember as I walked past Cowdrey at slip going back to the pavilion, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Bad luck." It didn't help at all. And but then I did catch him later off Ted. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I caught it 2 matches later. I caught Cyril Washbrook, who of course had played for England for many years, and opened the batting with Len Hutton, which was also a wonderful scull.
Yeah, well, my mother, when she was carrying me, was besotted by cricket. And I was either going to be called Dennis or Cyril. So I think I've had a lucky escape with John.
Yes, indeed. I'm just trying to think who you were named after.
No cricketer.
There was
no cricketing. None at all. But then your extraordinary life connected, always linked to the game of cricket, and your parents took you to village cricket in Norfolk, and then you stumbled, and this isn't unusual, I say this as a former sports editor, you stumbled into sports writing. An awful lot of people do, bizarrely, but you stumbled in.
Well, I stumbled in, and the original reason for stumbling in was I couldn't bear the city of London. And I thought, I've got to do something else. And I took myself out to dinner one night and thought, what have I ever been good at? The only thing I come up with was cricket. I mean, which is gone in a way. But I thought, I've got various friends of mine who write about the game in the Telegraph particularly. And why shouldn't I have a try? And it was just as vague a thought of that. I'd become by then an Arab, and I don't mean by that I wore a discharge. I was a friend of Jim Swanton, the famous cricket writer of the Telegraph, who had founded in the 30s a club called the Arabs, a nomadic club, as the name suggests. And when I became an Arab, in 1962, there was a cocktail party that in May at the old Hyde Park Hotel in London. I can't think why, but it was. And I met there for the first time a very, very famous cricket writer, I think the greatest cricket writer there's ever been, called Johnny Woodcock, who was the Times cricket correspondent and you knew. But he became that cricket correspondent in 1954. And retired in 87, and he was an extraordinary judge of the game. Anyway, we met and we were talking about what I was doing and what I was not doing, and I was telling him how beastly the city was. And I told him I wanted to become a cricket writer, and he didn't exactly inspire me with confidence. He said to me, I wouldn't advise that if I was you, which wasn't exactly what I wanted to hear. But the extraordinary thing was, we finished talking, he said, look, I don't think I can be of any help to you, but if I can, I've got your telephone number. I went to the city the next day, this is an absolutely true story, and got home to a little flat in Chelsea, and went into the house, and there was like one of those yellow telegram envelopes. Do you remember the one? Virulent yellow. I mean, you wouldn't put on no dark glasses to look at them. Rather like this sort of colour. And I opened it, and it said, would I ring a number in Hampshire, and Woodcock? And so I rang. And that day, or the day before, one member of the Times cricket writing staff had either broken a leg, or I rather think he had broken something actually, and couldn't go and do any work for the next few weeks. Would I go for the next 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday, and watch a game between Kent and Somerset at Gravesend, Batton Ball Ground at Gravesend, where Kent used to play odd matches in those days. And I said, yippee. And he said, go round straight away to the Times and see the sports editor, John Hennessy. And very much five-star Hennessy he was by the end of the evening. I did that and got given the press ticket. And the next day drove down to Gravesend, rang up the Times at 3 o'clock, as I was told to do it, and I said, how much do you want? And they said, 550 words, I think it was, they said. And all I could think of was War and Peace. And anyway, I eventually churned it out and telephoned it through. And the next morning, I stayed that night at a hotel euphemistically named The Grand in Rochester, High Street, and went out, and I went about 6:30 in the morning to get a copy of the Times. And as I went downstairs, the hall porter thought I was trying to do a runner. He said, I can't go. I said, it's all right, I left my wife upstairs as surety. And he didn't think that was funny either. And I got a copy. No, it was quite funny. I went across the street. There was a newsagent's. And the chap, awfully nice man, he said, did you not sleep very well? And I said, no, I didn't really. He said, what can I do for you? I said, can I have a copy of the Times, please? And he looked at me, he looked very sorrowful, and he said, I'm awfully sorry. So he said, I'm afraid I've already sold it. and so I had to go to 2 more shops before I got the Times, and lo and behold, they'd printed pretty well everything I'd written. And that was how it all began.
Oh. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And then eventually your writing career, helped by young Woodcock, proceeded, but you then were offered the opportunity of trying broadcasting.
Well, that came in a rather strange way too, because do you remember a chap called John Thickness who wrote for the Evening Standard? Yeah. Well, John was a friend, and said to me one day in 1968, I'd done my 7th year as a writer, And he said to me at a county match one day, have you ever thought about broadcasting? And I said, about commentating, sorry. And I said, no. And I hadn't. I would listen to TMS, but I'd never actually thought about sort of that I might one day become part of it. And I said, what do I do? And he said, you write to the head of OB's bracket, sound bracket, very important, who was then a chap called Robert Hudson, who was a well-known rugby, cricket, and Royal Occasions commentator. And I ended up by doing a sort of trial at the Oval. Brian Johnston was there, Surrey and someone. And when he wasn't commentating, I recorded 2 20-minute pieces. They recorded it down the line at Broadcasting House. And went round and listened to it with a chap, an enormous man called Henry Riddle, who was a great friend of Lord Reith. And who said in the end, he said, we rather like it. You begin to paint the picture. We've added your name to the list of Test match special commentators. And that was how it began. Although the telephone didn't actually ring again until 1972. When I
They just wanted to be sure.
Well, he did say you may not get in trouble as you may not get too many chances, but I didn't think it was going to be extreme as that. But by then, I'd been on the West Indies in 71/2 to watch New Zealand play their first tour. And there are 2 networks, 2 radio networks in all the West Indian islands and territories. And one of them employed the New Zealand commentator, the government-owned station, and the other station, owned by Rediffusion in London, wanted an overseas voice. And someone asked me and said, have you ever commentated on cricket? And I said, I've hardly ever done anything else. and I got the job. And it was exciting. I suddenly sort of found that I probably could do it. And in front of what was, I'm not being, this may sound as I'm being right down complimentary, I'm not. But perhaps it was a less exacting audience than it would have been in London, inspired by Broadcasting House. I don't know. Anyway, when I got home, this had all been, I think Robert hasn't heard about this, and I had a letter saying, would I do 2 days reporting, really, more than commentating, of the Whit Weekend, the old Whit Weekend at Chelmsford, Essex, Warwickshire. And I did that. And the following Thursday, I got another letter from Robert Hudson saying, would I join Test Match Special for 2 one-day games in England, Australia, the first ever one-day series, at the end of August at Lord's and early September at Edgbaston. So it all happened quite quickly when it started, you know.
I'm going to have to diverge here because you mentioned the West Indies, and in your book with disarming self-deprecation, you say at risk of name dropping, you had a rather lovely dinner party in the West Indies with Noel Coward.
Oh yes, but that was earlier. That was in 1961 when. Ian Fleming, who I knew, there's the Blofeld connection and Stavro, and you know, the one who strokes the white pussycat on the movies. And I went to my first honeymoon in 1961, and I met Ian Fleming in my club in London, St James's Street, and we got talking in the bar, and I told him a story, and he enjoyed it, and always used to come up and say, we've got more stories. And we sort of got to know each other in the club. And he knew that I was getting married for the first time in 19... Well, he didn't know I was getting married for the first time, because I didn't myself. But... Anyway, he lived at Golden Eye in Oricabassa, which was very near the Jamaica Inn at Chirias, where we were honeymooning. And I had a note from him when I arrived saying, would I round? And we asked to sort of lunch. I mean, it was chaos. His house. There was nothing. He would tell you nibble occasionally. The only thing that had any permanency about it was the infernally strong rum punches, which he mixed himself. And then sometime after what you would think was the time for lunch, about 2 o'clock, I was doing a card draw up, and Noel Coward got out. And at the end of lunch, about 7 o'clock, when everyone thought they ought to go home, he got up and said, my dear boy, I've been so enchanted to have met you, a beautiful lady bride. He said, it was to me a great privilege and honour of coming to my little house at Port Maria. Well, we did. And he rang up the next day. This is rather amusing. We were staying at Jamaica Inn, and I was sitting on an enormous double bed. And telephone rang. I picked it up. and said hello, and a voice said, "Can I speak to Henry Blofeld?" And I said, "Speaking." He said, "This is Noel Coward." He said, "I don't know if you remember, we met at Ian Fleming's place yesterday," which was quite a good throwaway line. and we went to dinner, and it was extraordinary. He never stopped talking. Assassinated more characters in the acting profession than you knew existed. Lynn Fontaine, the actress, was there. And there were quite a lot of other chaps there too, who were friends of Noel's. And at the end of the evening, I can see now he was wearing a faded, claret-coloured, it was a sort of claret-coloured cotton jacket. And he pushed the chair back and still held the legs, the wood squeaking on the floor. And went the Bechstein Grand, which he said he composed most of his music, was in that room. It was the only room of any size, because the house in Firefly Hill he had built just for one person. It was tiny. But he then got up, he was smoking a cigarette out of the obligatory cigarette holder, which he put down on a gold ashtray on the body of the Bechstein, and the smoke curled beguilingly up, sat at the keyboard, and played and sang Mad Dogs and Englishmen, Don't Put Your Daughter on the Stage, Mrs. Worthington, and The Stately Homes of England, and life really honestly doesn't get much better than that.
No. I mean, if you're going to drop names, Ian Fleming, Noel Coward, Joan Fontaine,
Well, I was doing it. I mean, even Giles Brandreth would be jealous of that.
Oh, he would come a distant second to you, honestly. Oh, dear. But there you are now. Your career is launched on TMS with two legends of cricket commentary, in Brian Johnston and John Arlott. Arlott, loved by everybody, wonderful commentator.
I won't have anything said against him. I mean, he was a terrific help to me. The funny thing was, Arlott didn't like the establishment. And when at that age, I was very much a son of the establishment, if you see what I mean. And yet, we always got on. Whether it was attraction of opposites, goodness knows. But I will never forget, in the first Test match I ever did in 1974, we were at Old Trafford, staying at the Swan at Bucklow Hill, which then was one of the worst 3 hotels in the world. And it rose rather rapidly to become the worst of all. And at dinner the night before, 5 of us were there, and we all had dinner together, and Arlott sort of presided. And the only late absentee was the wine waiter. And when he arrived, he said to Arlott rather brusquely, he said, "Do you want anything to drink, sir?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "We'll have 3 of the white and 5 of the red." And not knowing who he was talking to, the wine waiter said, you mean glasses?" "Glasses, you fool. Bottles." and that was the start. But the next day, you had to be very careful. The next day, when I finished my first day's Test match commentary, came down a rather narrow flight of stairs from a very uncomfortable commentary box at the I'm trying to think what the end was, doesn't matter. And as I went out trying to beat the traffic with 20 minutes left, I'd handed over to Brian. Arlott came out of the shadows, put his hand around me and said, "Henry, that was very good," he said, "but I think we should have dinner tonight." And he used to do this quite a lot, and he would never grip me by the throat and say, "Do it this way rather than that way." He would say, "That was very good, but do you think you might have said this?" And it was done so well and so nicely. I never took offense to anything he said. And he was absolutely right.
It's a great skill, isn't it?
Well, that was a great... I mean, there were 2 great skills. One, his commentary skill, and the other, his way of dealing with me, which was easy. I mean, when people come up to you and say, "You got that wrong," you can take offense, can't you?
Yeah.
But there was no chance of that. And I think one felt anyway that one was in the presence of God, or someone very near God.
Very close to him. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And Johners was...
Oh, Johners was irrepressible. I mean, the jokes that came all the time. I mean, you simply never knew. You spent most of the time laughing. I mean, Johners was a figure of fun. I don't think when you look at a photograph of him, you look at his enormous, he had huge lobes of his ears. And he was the only person I've ever seen able to do this. He could pick up the lobes of both ears, tuck them in, and they stayed there. and when the first test I did at Lord's, on the first day, I had to carry 2 briefcases of Arlott up to the commentary box, one of which contained 6 bottles of claret, the other contained 5. And when I thought they were learned tomes about cricket, wisdoms and things, and then on the next day, I settled down as commentator before lunch, and Johners handed over to me, having been commentating with Fred Truman. And Fred stayed, because summarisers did half-hour stints rather than 20-minute stints. And Johnston got up and went and sat the other side of Fred's. There was a long front row. I mean, not off air. There was no microphone. And I did the next over, and then turned to Fred on my right or left, and asked him a question, and was looking at him. And Johners was the other side, who leant right forward, looked at me and held my eyes, and very slowly picked up one ear, one lobe, and tucked it in. And I bit my teeth. Then he picked up the other one, and I thought I'm in control. But when about 10 seconds later, both eyebrows went up like that, and they popped out like out of a gun. I was gone. Oh, he was very, 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 very naughty. Then there was the awful moment. The funniest of all, I suppose, was Headingley in '76 when a little black dachshund ran out on the and John was like, he said, "That we got a little dog." He said, little black dachshund. He said, you know what he's doing? He's making a beeline for the coastal end. I can't think, why goodness me, there he is in the middle of the pitch, scratching away with his right paw. He said, I think he's going to spend a penny. So to some part, Thomas Spencer, he's got one of those jerseys the bowlers wear, and he's showing it away. It's a rather good bullfight. I'll keep you posted. But first, he said, I want to tell you cricket lovers at home that this Dachshund's a fast bowler. And the reason I know he's a fast bowler is because he's got 4 short legs and his balls swing both ways. Very difficult to keep a straight face.
But I think, it was this wonderful way that Test Match Special became what it did, with obviously not a producer saying, no, you say this, you do this. It just happened in this wonderful way.
Can I say that, just pay credit to one of the great reasons for this, was we had a producer for 37 years, I think it was, Peter Baxter, who got no publicity at all, did an absolutely heroic job in turning this programme into what it was. Peter was a commentator himself, and knew what good broadcasting should sound like, and was quite prepared to go to Johners, to John Arlott, to Fred Truman, to Trevor Bailey, whoever, and say to them, you cannot do that. And they respected this. And if I was to say, and there's nothing worse than hearing old commentators being critical of what's going on today, if I was at all critical, had anything critical to say about today's thing, it is, I don't think that it's probably carefully produced enough. I would say no more.
But in your day, it didn't sound as though it was produced.
No, it wasn't.
That was the secret.
This is absolutely right. And of course, people used to come into the box all the time and were amazed to find the atmosphere of sort of a party rather than something a great deal more serious. And of course, you see, the other thing was, in those days, we drank quite a lot in the box. We did. John Arlott had drank for the world. He had an amazing thirst. John Arlott's lunch every day's Test cricket was 2 bottles of claret of a very good year, and he didn't drink it with us. He drank it either in the press box or in his car. And he was quite remarkable how he held on to it. Johners didn't drink at all, although Arlott persuaded him that a little white burgundy was quite a good idea later on. You know. But I was going to tell a story, and I can't think what I was going to tell. What was I? I've gone blank.
No, you haven't. No, don't worry.
Oh, champagne cork. Valeria's done it. She always does. She's brilliant, my wife. Well done. But at about about midday in the box, you heard this noise. And Peter Baxter would get a bit worried about that. But Trevor Bailey always took the sting out of it. Wherever he was in the box, he would always say in a loud voice, the medicine. And that sort of justified it.
But you brought your own individual type of commentary, which you write up beautifully in the book.
Well,
where you talk about painting a picture, and the picture would involve buses, seagulls, trains, planes, which I remember with great affection. If there was, you could always tell if there was a singularly dull moment in a test match, you would come up with a diversion.
Well, you see, I think there are two points here. One is that I think a commentator's always got to remember that he is, above all else, an entertainer in a way. And therefore, if the cricket is dull, and it can be, I mean, a game of test cricket goes on for 5 days, and it's a bit like a symphony concert. It has its quick bits, its slow bits, and its medium bits. And if you get too much of the really slow bits, you've got, I think, then to look around and find something that's going to entertain and interest your audience, and which I think is one of the reasons why all those extraneous bits and pieces become quite important. I mean, Lord, sitting in the pavilion where we commentated from for years and still should do, rather than that ghastly contraption at the other end of the ground, we used to see buses pouring down the Wellington Road. And there was the great occasion once, I must tell you this, when I was on the air and I said, my God, there's a wonderful gleaming red bus there in the Wellington Road. Stop that, and another one's joined it too. And there's a third bus. Good heavens, I said, it's extraordinary. There's a bus convention going on. And the fourth one, there's 4 buses in a row. Peter Baxter, our producer, was heard to say in a loud voice in the back of the box, for God's sake, someone tell Blowers it's a bus stop. But now, I'm afraid all those lovely things have gone into retirement now, but there we are. I mean, I suppose... I think there was a place for them, because I remember Henry Riddle saying to me when he listened to the 2 trial tapes I did at the Oval all those years ago in 1968, he said, the best compliment a listener can ever pay a broadcaster is to say, you made me feel you were there. And to do that, you've got to make sure, if you can, that your listeners know exactly where you're sitting and what you can see. And he said, you want to, so they are then literally, or illiterally, looking through your eyes and can see everything. And he said, that's why these other bits become quite important. And he said, of course, you mustn't overdo it. You mustn't get in the way of the action. But at cricket, there's an awful lot of time. I mean, when the fast bowler bowls are made over, and the ball keeps on going through the wicketkeeper, and then he trudges all the way back to the end of his mark. There's an awful lot of time when nothing is happening, when you can say these things. And I think probably it enhances a boring day. At least that's my view, anyway.
I was staggered in reading your book that it's 7 years since we heard your dulcet tones on TMS.
You can hear the sighs of relief.
Well, no, I think the audience shows there's an awful lot of people think back to 7 years ago and your dulcet tones coming through. But you also do a wonderful description since you've retreated to Norfolk of how you listen to cricket. I love it, that you still listen to.
I listened to it very much in 2023, last year, when we had that wonderful, wonderful Ashes series. And at that point, this book was going through my mind very much. And the inspiration I was telling you now for this book was not all the lovely things we've really been talking about, although they do play a very big part in the first half. But what inspired me was what is happening in the cricket world today, the total chaos, which is championed by the ever increasing, like mushrooms, the T20 franchise world. And it made me think, well, goodness me, when I began, it was a very relaxed world. We watched cricket 6 days a week. We watched 2 innings cricket, and we thought the world was going on forever. And there were plenty of time to do other things. And, but now you look at what's happening in the world of cricket at the moment, and you just simply don't know what's happening. I mean, next Monday, England start playing a test series in Pakistan, and they've hardly the ink hasn't dried on the international cricket. It's not. Australia played the last of something like 8 or 9 one-day games in September. They played it about a week ago. And here we are on next Monday playing a test series in Pakistan. And how many one-day T20 matches are happening around the world? God knows. It's chaos. And I just wanted to draw the comparison between the game as I learned it, played it, tipped my toe into a little bit of the shallow end of first-class cricket, and then the commentary box, and compare it all to what is happening today, which was the reason for the book in my mind. And therefore, I wanted to make much or quite a lot of that wonderful test series in 2023, when England and Australia showed that test cricket is still a wonderful, wonderful game. And the interesting thing is, people are always talking about money. Certainly, one-day cricket earns more money, and the players are being drawn to it for that reason. But that series last year, these figures are correct. There were 24 days test cricket because the last day at Old Trafford was rained off, which is why England, in fact, didn't win the series 3-2. There were 24 days test cricket, and each day, each of those 24 days was worth to the authorities over £250 million, which is a lot of money. And it means that test cricket played the way it should be is and we'll come to baseball perhaps in a moment, which is a good thing, I think. It is very much a viable operation, and it should be nurtured and looked after rather than being pushed eternally to the margins, and who knows, to extinction one day maybe. And that would be desperate, because if you imagine cricket without 2 innings cricket, the standard of play, I think what we're going to watch would be miserable, because I don't think cricket is a game of 4 sixes and over. It's a game that has thrived because of the wonderful balance between bat and ball.
Well, you're an enthusiast for baseball, for Mr.
Baseball, I'm a great enthusiast for, because it's eliminated the draw pretty well. I mean, there's only been one draw since Ben Stokes took over, and that was the one that was washed out at Old Trafford last year, which, you know, is not his fault. And therefore it makes Test cricket a product which is much more watchable, because every ball has a purpose. And, okay, the danger at the other end is that the Test matches are finishing in 3 and 4 days. But personally, I think that is much better. And I think the market can cope with that much more than the present market can cope with interminable draws when only 3 innings are completed in 5 days. Does that make sense?
And another thing. No, I think it's wonderful because you do tackle this subject very stridently in your book. And I agree with you. And I won't even dare mention the 100. But I think, I would guess most people in this room are followers of Test cricket. Yeah, I see noddings. And it would be a tragedy if we lost it.
Well, you see, did you read, there was a fascinating piece in the Times the day we came back from Malta, which was the 30th, Monday the 30th. Michael Atherton had interviewed Mervyn King, who was the governor of the Bank of England for quite a while. And he is now president of MCC. And he was saying that the strategy of selling the silver, the family's silver now, i.e. the 100, and they're hoping to get in excess of $500 million for the 49% which, of each of the 8 franchises which are being sold to business all over the world. They're doing this in order to finance county cricket, which is losing money and will continue to lose money. And if you sell the family's silver to finance something that's losing money, you're going to run out of money eventually. And then what happens then? And so what the authorities should be doing is doing all they can to try and turn county cricket into a profitable, into profit. And they aren't trying to do that. They're doing it the other way around, which is dangerous. And I thought that was fascinating. Did you read that?
I did, yeah. Right, it's your turn now to ask questions of blowers. I was intrigued that your wife calls you blowers.
I know.
Wonderful.
It's very good, isn't it?
We have.
She sometimes gives me a blowers from the other side of the bed too, and I'm not quite so certain about it then. But there we
We have people with microphones.
Thank you. Your encyclopedic memory is extraordinary, so I just want to test you on one. And if we had a time machine here today and were able to take you back to be able to watch one day's cricket again, which one would it be?
I think I would have to say the last day at Headingley in '81. Do you remember that extraordinary test match? Botham was captain at the start of the series. We lost the game, didn't we? Or was the first? No, the first one was drawn at Trent Bridge, I think. Botham then made a pair of spectacles at Lord's, resigned the captaincy a minute before he was about to be sacked. Michael Brearley came back to take on the captaincy. Botham played in the next test at Headingley, and after 2.5 days, England looked as though they were going to lose by an innings and a million. Beefy then goes out and makes 149 not out. Graham Dilley makes 57, who'd never scored 50 in his life before. The other tail-enders, Chris Earle particularly, contributes, and Australia had to get 130 to win. And on the last day, it rained, which helped narrow the equation, so to speak, of runs and wickets. And Bob Willis started bowling from the football stand end up the hill and got nowhere. And then persuaded Brearley to change him round, so he came down the hill, bowled like a man inspired, took 8 for 43. And I was actually on the air. Aggers just handed over to me when Bob Willis started what was his last over, and to Ray Bright, who was 19 not out. He and Dennis Lilly, for the 8th wicket, had taken the score past to 200, and it just looked then as though Australia were going to win. Anyway, the 9 wicket, Lilly then tried to hook Willis. The ball hit high up on the bat, and Gatting ran in from mid-on, didn't see the ball, and then dived and made what was an easy catch originally. By not sighting it, it became very difficult, and he took it brilliantly. And then Ray Bright was facing Willis, and Willis ran into bowl, and I was on the air, it was the first ball, and Bright went half forward, and his middle stump cartwheeled back to Taylor, and England won by 18 runs. But that whole day was simply astonishing. And not least, and this is an awful thing to say, but Alan McGilvray was the Australian commentator. And Alan McGilvray was a chap that if you got a sense of humour and put it on a silver salver and put a sort of a ring of gold paper around it, he still didn't know what it was. Watching Australia turn a certain victory into abject defeat was worth almost more than the victory itself.
Was that a good enough answer?
Sorry, I was looking at that's the day I would have again.
Hi, Bello. I was really enjoying the story. I wondered, you've told us a bit about the changes in the TMS box and changing styles of commentary. Who do you think in the current set you feel that carrying the mantle for the old style? Who do you think who would you rate in the current crop? Angus is obviously retiring.
Are you talking about the commentary box?
Yes.
I don't like to talk about it as an old commentator, talk about the commentary. I think Angus is absolutely brilliant. He's got 4 more years, or 3.5 more years now, as a commentator, and I think he's going to leave an enormous gap when he goes. He's very much one of the old school. You see, the form of commentary has changed dramatically. I gave up in 2017. If I went into the box now and did it my way, I don't think they'd want to use me. It's become very, very different. It's all chatter. The commentators don't really. You see, when I commentated, you had the commentator had the over to himself, and unless something really dramatic happened, the summariser only came in at the end of the over. But now the summariser comes in between every ball, and the commentary goes on as a form of conversation. The great danger of this, and which happens too frequently, and I was talking about lack of production earlier, and I'll put a point on it now. You get a commentator and summariser talking over the action, and you see, you cannot therefore create excitement. Cricket has 6 sacred moments and over. And he comes in and he bowls. And anything can happen. And you can only create excitement in the present tense, but never in the past tense. If your commentator is left to say, and he played, P-L-A-Y-E-D, that one, to short extra cover, and it was nearly run out, the excitement's gone. And that is one of the great differences, and one of the needs, I think, that someone needs to pull a few socks up. I think Simon Mann is a very good commentator. He's got a voice that's you get to by process of elimination, probably. You say, well, it's not so-and-so, therefore it must be. And that's not, no, I'm not being derogatory, but it is. And I mean, the others all do very good. I think Ebony Rainsford Brent is extremely good. I think she's the best of the girls. But it has all changed. And it's, I mean, I can remember my parents long years ago saying, more or less, thank God we won't be here and see what happens then. And I think this is probably one of the faults of old age. We all look back and think things were very much better when we were young, and I think I'm in danger perhaps of doing that. So I don't want to be critical, really, of the present. But I do at times feel that the strings, if you like it, the puppet strings should be a little bit tighter.
You're complimentary in the book about Andy Saltzman.
Oh, I think Andy Saltzman, I think he's wonderful. The scorer, I mean, he's a comic. He was a comic on the BBC. I mean, he took over from Andrew Sampson, who the South African, who is, I think, the best scorer I've ever worked with, and funnily enough, now lives in England, in Chester. But Saltzman, I think, is absolutely brilliant. And what's more, he has, I think, produced himself in a way, because he used to come in all the time and too much. Now he doesn't. He gets it absolutely right. I think he's brilliant. Thank you for mentioning that.
I'm a Saltzman fan. Another question over there.
Thank you very much. Have there been any other sports you've ever thought about commentating?
Have I ever thought? No, I haven't. I mean, I think if cricket's a fairly consuming thing. In an English summer, it goes on all the time. And I mean, one was going on tour. I watched some over 700 Test matches. And you've got to have a little bit of time off. You can't do. And I don't think I really wanted to commentate. I wouldn't have been good at commentating on a football or anything like that. I don't think. And golf, I've never played golf. I don't think it's not a game that I've ever really taken to. And if you don't take to it, I don't think you're going to commentate with it. So I think then enthusiasm is in short supply. And I loved cricket, passionate, and I think probably the one of the things I did have a bit of was enthusiasm, which I think helped, you know.
I think it's very important.
Does that answer that at all? I mean, I'm sorry, rather brief, but the answer is no.
Do we, any more?
Someone's got their hand up there.
Thank you. With you being an ex-wicket-keeper, I just wondered what your take was on current wicket-keeping, because there seems to be a heck of a lot of wicket-keepers come batsmen at the moment, and I was wondering who your favourite wicket-keeper of all time is and who your favourite all-rounder wicket-keeper is.
The best wicket-keeper of all time was Alan Knott, without any doubt whatever. He was a class ahead of anyone. And I don't mind what anyone says. It was. I remember there was a time when people thought Bob Taylor was in the same league. I remember Raymond Illingworth, saying when he came back from Australia, not long after the 71 or 71-2 series, which England he won, we won. And he said there's a different class to Taylor. He said not catchy things Taylor doesn't go for. And I always remember Illy saying that. Today, all-rounders, this is the trouble. The wicket-keeping job has been devalued. Wicket-keepers are chosen because of their ability with the bat, not because of their ability with the gloves, it seems to me. But Knott, in fact, scored, I think it was 9, it may have only been 7, but I think it was 900s for England. and so was a pretty useful all-rounder, actually. But today, I mean, look at Bairstow. If Bairstow kept wicket, Bairstow should never have had a pair of been allowed near a pair of wicket-keeping gloves. And look what he did in that first test at Edgbaston against Australia last year. Had we had any sort of a wicket-keeper, we'd have won that match in the Ashes. It was awful. But I'm not blaming Bairstow, but he was chosen to keep wicket because they wanted his ability in the middle order as a batsman. And you see we got this farcical, well, not farcical, but it's situated, it is farcical in a way in Surrey. Surrey's best wicketkeeper is Folkes, and he's probably the best wicketkeeper in the country. He might be the best wicketkeeper in the world at the moment, but yet he's not in the test side. Smith is, who is also with Surrey, but Surrey is second best keeper. Although I think Smith is a fine cricketer, fits Baz's ball beautifully. And I think Folkes has been there. He was on tour, wasn't he, in Pakistan. He's been on tour and he's done very well. But what I'm going to say now, I have no reason for saying, except a gut feeling, I don't think Folkes' face fits in the England dressing room. There are certain players of whom that is true. I cannot, he's a good batsman. He scored 100 in his first test match, Folkes, didn't he, in Sri Lanka? I can't think of any really good reason to have kept him out all the time he has been kept out, except that they don't care for him in the dressing room. Is that, I mean, no. I don't know. I'm not saying that is what's happened, but that seems to me the only reason that can account for it.
Asking a question here about batsmen. You saw Bradman play. You played in a match with Dennis Compton and Cowdrey. And
played two matches with Dennis Compton.
Yeah. Who, in your misty-eyed old age, do you look back and think, gosh, he was the most elegant or the best batsman I saw?
I have a great thing for Sobers. You see, Sobers was the greatest cricketer there's ever been. But I can remember Sobers at Lord's in, I can't remember which year it was, in the 60s when Sobers made 100 and so did his cousin David Holford. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And that innings of Gary was one. He came in at number 6, and number 6 is a difficult place to bat because you ran out of partners. And yet Gary always batted, and look at what he averaged. I mean, he was an amazing cricketer. Okay, he probably wasn't the best. On a really good day, Rowan Canai, what a wristy little, he was a wonderful, wonderful cricketer. Hooking and cutting, he was terrific. Greg Chappell was a fine cricketer. Martin Crowe of New Zealand. There are lots, I've been lucky to see lots, Kevin Peterson, but there we open a whole can of worms as soon as we produce his name. But as a cricketer, as a batsman, pure and simple, it's difficult to say anyone was ever a better batsman than him. He was a four-letter chap in the dressing room, and the rest of it without any doubt at all. And in the end, the England players, why Strauss kicked him out of cricket, was the England players said they wouldn't play with him in the dress, they wouldn't have him in the team, which is not something that's roundly known, but this actually did happen. He was a very, very, very tricky chap. I mean, when England played South Africa at Old Trafford, when Peterson was there, he, in fact, changed in the dressing room next door to Strauss. And yet, in one of the intervals, was found to be ringing up the South African dressing room, telling them the best way they could get Strauss out, which was hardly, I mean, there's a word for that, isn't there?
There is.
Yet he was, as a batsman, I mean, you look at that 150, 80 into the Oval, look at almost any innings he played, he was wonderful, it was staggering. I mean, I would always think of him in India, at Bombay, when we were there, was it 2012, I think it was. He and Alistair Cook made in very different veins, made a lot of runs together, 200 or 300 they put on. And I mean, the way Peterson just leant into these spinners and playing, as it were, a forward stroke and following through and hitting the ball far for 6. It was wonderful stuff. And yet, he was divisive beyond a belief in the dressing room.
Any more questions?
Yes, the one
over
there.
here. Sorry.
What's your this on. What's your favourite overseas ground?
Favourite overseas ground? My favourite ground of all in the world is Trent Bridge. But overseas, the Adelaide Oval is a wonderful ground. Newlands is a wonderful ground where they've cut down some of the oak trees, but they'll never cut down Table Mountain. A lot of West Indian grounds with all those palm trees and the water, and St. Vincent and St. Lucia and all the smaller islands. You don't get really beautiful grounds. I mean, Calcutta is extraordinary. You get 120,000 people who pay through the gate, and the other 123,000 get in somehow. It's extraordinary. I don't think there's a particularly beautiful ground in New Zealand. I think I would go for the Adelaide Oval. Of all the big grounds, I think one has to say Lords in a way, but Sydney Cricket Ground's a marvellous ground too, and they've developed that beautifully as well. But no, Adelaide, it would be the ground.
Right, I can barely believe it, but an hour has passed. I mean, it seems like about 10 minutes. There are pre-signed books over there, but if you'd like a personally signed copy to you, Henry will be doing them over there. But meanwhile, can I say, Henry Blowers, thank you so much. You've been a delight.
It's been great fun.